Woah. Hello everyone! Who has ever been on an airplane during a storm, a strong wind, or when one of the engines has stopped working? It's obviously not the best thing that can happen to you, and I really hope nobody has to go through something like that. However, when this happens on a plane, pilots have to demonstrate their abilities to balance the plane and land without killing anyone in the process. I am your Captain Van Jazz, and in this video I'm going to show you 10 of the most extreme landings that almost fail. Please get ready to feel this list as if it was you on those planes. Number 1. Hudson River Landing. This may sound incredible, but sometimes just a bird is enough to cause an air crash. Although this happens very rarely, passengers on this New York-Seattle flight had an emergency landing on the Hudson River after the plane was attacked by a gang of geese. 1 minute after takeoff, passengers noticed flames coming out of the engines. The geese were fried in the engines, making them explode. As the captain of the flight was reporting to air traffic about the accident, he took on the signals of alarm. Realizing he was not going to be able to keep the plane in the air, a very risky idea came to his mind. The only option to save the crew and the passengers was to land on the Hudson River. And so he tried. This incredible professional maneuver was a success. The passengers, frightened, went out alive. They ended up stepping out through the wings of the floating plane, waiting for lifeguards. Number 2. Roofless Plane Landing. In this case, the Flight 243 departed from Hilo International Airport in 1988. It had 6 crew members and 89 passengers on board. This flight was heading to Honolulu. Nothing unusual was noted during the pre-departure inspection of the aircraft. After the takeoff routine to go up in the airplane had reached its normal flight altitude, when suddenly a small section on the left side of the roof ruptured, causing air decompression and a lot of panic. The captain immediately felt the plane starting to roll left and right. Controls went loose as the cockpit door broke and then blew away. As the strong decompression took place, the roof over the 6 rows kept blowing away. The majority of the passengers found themselves in the open sky at a temperature of 45 degrees below zero. Can you imagine? Fortunately, they didn't even have time to unbuckle their seatbelts after the takeoff, which actually saved their lives. There was only one fatality, a 58-year-old flight attendant, which was swept out of the plane while standing near the 5th row seat. Unfortunately, her body was never found. At the end, the captain of the flight began an extreme descent in only 11 minutes to finally land the plane with just one of the engines, getting the crew and the passengers to survive this unbelievable experience and taking the plane back in one piece. Number 3. Beach Landing. What do you usually do on the beach? Maybe laying on the sand, enjoying the sea sound and tranquility. Except on Maho Beach, in the island of San Martin. This beach is located right next to an international airport, so airplanes fly so low that the drafts blow you away, despite local authorities warning beach visitors. This airport has a very short takeoff runway, so the planes have to take off and land at very low altitudes. Airplanes do pass flying 10 meters above the ground, causing tourists to lower their heads, taking photos one after another and actually almost touching airplanes. Could you keep your vacation relaxed with planes passing over your head every minute? No wonder! The beach has white sand and has little to no vegetation because of the jet blast erosion. In July of 2017, as a flight was taking off, a 57-year-old woman from New Zealand was killed. She was holding onto a fence at the end of the runway when the wind blew her away, causing her head to smash into concrete. My God. Landing with no windshield. A pilot has been awarded with a National Medal of Courage in honor to his actions for safely landing a jet full of passengers that had to be landed blindly, after the windshield was smashed by giant hailstones formed by a violent storm over Turkey, where the plane was flying by July of 2017. This Ukrainian pilot had to land the airplane in an incredible way, practically blind, looking out at the side window with the whole crew on board and 121 passengers, where employees at the airport can be seen and heard saying, "It won't be able to land, it won't land." But the aircraft did land safely and was greeted by a big applause from everybody in the waiting emergency services. Number 5. Landing with one pilot outside. To start with this breathtaking situation, let's turn our heads to 1990, when the pilot windshield of a flight suddenly exploded and left Tim Lannister, one of the pilots, sucked out of the plane. The only thing keeping him from flying out into the distance and plumbing to his death was a flight attendant who rapidly ran into the cockpit and grabbed Mr. Lancaster by the belt. As co-pilot Alistair declared the emergency, the pilot was still outside the window from his knees up, being crushed against the plane at 500 miles per hour, suffering from frostbite and almost losing consciousness. The pilot began an urgent descent and issued an alarm signal to fly to the nearest airport for an emergency landing. Passengers and crew had to experience this incredible adventure because of an airport technician who changed the windshield of the plane the day before, but later it was found that he accidentally placed the glass with the wrong screws. Tim Lannister received help for his wounds and broken arms, and 5 months later he returned to the sky. Number 6. Smoke cloud landing. As a Boeing 747 was making a long flight from London to Auckland in New Zealand, suddenly the fuselage was filled with smoke and the pilot's windows were covered with smashing sparks. Surprisingly, this phenomenon is known among pilots as a San Telmo fire, and it can be seen by the wings of a plane during storms. But this time, there were no storms in sight. After a bright white light covered the entire airplane, passengers started to see flames coming out of all of the 4 engines of the aircraft. The co-pilot and the crew members were desperately making anything on their hands to get the engines to work back again, but all attempts were worthless. So, as many were already getting ready to actually die on the airplane, suddenly a miracle happened and the 4th engine started to run back again. Then, the rest of all engines became alive again. The plane managed to reach Jakarta Airport and land with the 248 passengers plus 15 crew members. Later, it was known that the airplane was flying right over where a volcano had just exploded. So it was concluded that this incident was caused by a cloud of volcanic ash affecting the plane electrically and magnetically in all of its systems. Number 7. Old-style analog landing. Somewhere in Siberia, September of 2010, a Russian plane had to manage to land deep in the depths of the forest in Siberia in his way to Moscow. But what's so interesting about it? Well, what happened was amazing, because after 3.5 hours on the flight, there was a total power failure on board, so most of the instruments were turned off. Fuel pumps stopped and it became impossible to have control over the wings mechanically. All navigational and radio equipment were turned off mysteriously, meaning that the aircraft would not be able to reach its destination. So, pilots began to think and search for an ideal place to land, and they found it. It was a cement airstrip, quite small, but pilots managed to land this huge and uncontrollable aircraft in an old-fashioned way. The thing was that brakes failed on the runway and the plane ended up crashing into the trees. Anyway, it all went well, as none of the 72 passengers nor the crew members were injured. Number 8. Hurricane Irma landing. During this incredible hurricane storm, one of the least pleasant situations for a commercial aircraft unfortunately happened. This airplane flying from Munich to Hamburg had to go through this. As everything seems to be under control in an everyday normal flight, the powerful winds caused by Hurricane Irma, with speeds up to 75 miles per hour, started to pull the plane out of its course. The reckless pilot in charge was determined to land his plane. However, when the plane hit the ground, strong wind tipped the plane, making the left wing hit the runway at 150 miles per hour. He was able to align the aircraft again after the hit. While the airplane was making a turnaround to try to land again, the plane finally landed successfully, despite serious damages to the left wing. Number 9. Landing on a crossroad. This is probably the most extreme situation for a pilot actually happening in this airport located in Gibraltar on South Europe. While the runway isn't particularly hard to land at, an interesting design feature makes it incredibly dangerous. Because the main street in the area, the Winston Churchill Avenue, happens to intersect the airport's runway, so it has to be closed when a plane needs to land. But there have been a number of close calls in the airport's history. In February of 2017, a Royal Police vehicle drove onto the runway in a bid to stop a plane from taking off. This was due to a serving member of the military on board of the aircraft being wanted by the police for alleged sex offenses. The suspect was eventually removed from the aircraft and the plane was allowed to leave 2 hours later. Number 10. Ice landing. Not many people travel to Antarctica, which means that the airport infrastructure is significantly lacking. Temperatures here are below freezing on average the entire year. In 1970, there was a bad crash of a C-121 that still sits off the side buried in snow. Many months of the year, it is dark all day long, and due to the lack of light, pilots are trained to land using night vision goggles. If you think these pilots are all professional heroes, please give us a like and share the video. If you have any extreme experiences on planes, tell us in the comments below and hit the subscribe button to get more cool countdowns. I'm Banjaz and you are flying safely on Woah Viral. Stay tuned. Woah Viral.